More information www.mesmerism.info. Long live.
Live.
Live. Long live, long live, long live, long live, long live, long live. Javier, what did they do to us?
What did they do to Argentina with this quarantine?
Well, the Argentine quarantine has been a caveman quarantine. It has been the longest and deepest quarantine in the world, and it has been an absolutely wrong decision. Today Argentina is among the countries with the highest number of deaths per million inhabitants. In other words, the quarantine was useless.
But then what was the government's main mistake? What if it didn't help?
The main mistake of the government was to give absolute priority to the infectocracy led by the imbecile Pedro Can because, looking at Argentina, the only thing they used was basically the name of the scientific method. The scientific method derives from a model called SIRT, which means susceptible, infected, and removed. Susceptible, which is the number of people who can become infected. Then you have the infected, and that also generates infections, and that makes the number of infected grow, and on the other hand you have the removed ones, which are the ones that leave the system either because they were cured or died. The dynamics of an epidemic has to do with the evolution of how people are becoming infected and how people are being removed. The first part depends very especially on individuals, on individual decisions that basically have to do with hygiene, with social distancing, the use of chin straps, what has to do, for example, with protocols. And the other part has to do with how the health system takes charge. And there, let's say, the use of tests plays a central role, that is, that there are massive tests. Because when you do massive tests, that allows you to remove at a higher speed, and since the infected person is in the system for less time, fewer people are infected. So the key is, well, do a lot of testing and also follow up, that is, traceability, right? And in reality that was not done in Argentina.
And why was it not done? It would be examples outside that it was successful in.
Because politicians are thieves. Basically for that, when the virus arrived in Argentina, 4 months had already passed in the world, you'd had to capitalize on that experience, but what did the government prioritize? The government locked up everyone, and what did that do? It generated a brutal drop in the level of activity that has as its counterpart a sharp drop in tax collection. But what did President Alberto Fernandez say? That theirs was not touched, the privileges of the political oligarchy were not touched, because they consider themselves a superior caste that, let's say, can leave everyone without income, but theirs is not touched. On the other hand, you saw a possibility of increasing slaves, right? Because what did they do? They enlarged the clientelistic apparatus. So, for them that seemed like an interesting solution to increase their votes, and also the other thing they did was go for more public works, and they left the testing for last because with the tests they couldn't steal, because as the witnesses are important if they came to bribing or doing something like that, let's say, were very evident. Basically the disaster has to do with the lie that the state is because they told you that the state takes care of you. It happens that you were systematically paying taxes so that they give you a health system that when the time came did not respond, and they had to make investments that they had not made for a lot of years, but they also told you that the state would take care of you later, nor they didn't even know how to count the dead. And obviously when they had to choose a methodology to deal with the situation, they used a methodology in which they could steal, and that is why, let's say, they did not use the successful strategy from all over the world, which was to make massive witnesses.
They asked society for a gigantic effort. They put a tax that is almost 100% that is not being able to work. And the politicians who did their part, what did they contribute?
Nothing. In other words, they basically generated an economic disaster because while the companies were left without income, At the same time, they forced them to continue paying taxes. They forced them to continue paying salaries, not to fire people. That is, what's more, they even sent a law to suspend bankruptcies. In other words, an absolutely ridiculous thing. They told you, no, well, the state saved the company because it gave a TP. No, it didn't save you. Actually, what did he do? Left you with no income, okay? And since you're screwing up your life, he makes up for it by getting you money through another window. Now, but that money, where did you get it from? He took it out of missio monetaria, which, let's say, is absolutely spurious. Therefore, they did not even make any sacrifice, because what they should have done was lower public spending to reduce the pressure on companies and for companies to be better off. But they do not like that because money stops passing through porous hands of politicians. And the reality is that Argentina is going to be among the 3 economies that fall the most in the world. Argentina is second in the misery index. Argentina is 3rd in the level of inflation, but also, having the longest and deepest quarantine in the world, we have to belong to the group of 10% of countries with the highest number of deaths per million. That is to say, it is nonsense, that is, everything failed. It's not the pandemic, it's the quarantine, stupid. But aside, what must be understood is that the remedy was worse than the disease. That is, and it has caused enormous damage. In other words, because one sees the drop in GDP, the typical volume pro grade asshole always appears to you.
Oh no, you are materialists, the GDP.
No, stupid, you have to. Let's say GDP falls the way it is.
People die for it too.
You understand me? It's crazy. These people are criminal. What he did is criminal. That is delusional. They are criminals.
When did you know that this quarantine was going to be a disaster?
After the first renovation. I mean, because I started to.
And the renewal of the quarantine term.
Of course, because the first quarantine made sense. If you, in that quarantine, take the opportunity to upgrade the health system and take the opportunity to educate people on how to deal with it, everything that has to do with social distancing, hygiene, the use of face masks, all of that. Where you give the health system time to be more responsive, then the critical cases are greatly reduced and then you have the number of deaths drop. That made sense, but then...
Extending and extending.
Sure. But then something much more complicated appeared, and that is that the government liked this, because it achieved the wet dream of all shit, which is total control over the population. This sounds crazy. This is in a book by Foucault from 1975 called Discipline and Punish. In chapter 3 he deals with the subject of discipline and tells the case of a community at the end of the 18th century, how they dealt with the plague. And when you see that description, it doesn't differ much. For example, when you define who is essential and who is not, who can go out and who can't, how they are controlled, how they are monitored, how they are all locked up. Of course, it is the dream of the communist, because it has all human beings under control.
And one up to the ultimate to rescue of his life.
Exactly, but worst of all is that they did not stop there. Because Foucault later, in 1977, made an improvement on this and said, to biocontrol, that is, to be physically controlled, he added control of the psyche. And that, in the Argentine case, let's say, was rude throughout the world, but in the Argentine case it was worse. Because you, in the whole world, what did you find? You found that the Ocalos were where in real time they showed you the number of deaths in the world.
They play on people's fear.
Well, that's the other point. The central axis is fear. That is to say, because deep down, let's say, that is, over the years, that is, the great fear that human beings continue to have is the fear of death. And when, let's say, they threaten you with death, let's say, and they persecute you with death and they show it to you all day in that way without giving you an order of magnitude, that is, they are instilling fear in people who don't have sense. I mean, let's see, they took time. I mean, what did Friedman say? First the data, let's see. How many people die in a year on planet Earth? 60 million human beings, 165,000 per day. It took the coronavirus 105 days to reach that number. In other words, then, what seems to me is that the quarantine allowed governments with a totalitarian vocation to advance in this program. In the case of Argentina has an additional complication. The problem is that with the arrival of the coronavirus, this process fed back and all the works of Camporanga appeared, to pronounce the advance to the left and pronounce the agenda of the Forum of San Pablo, because what Argentina is doing is not that it has no plan. The plan is the Forum of San Pablo, and that plan, where was it applied? It was applied in Venezuela. In the last 6 years the GDP of Venezuela fell 70%. It has a hyperinflation of around 4,900%. In other words, in addition, the salary of a Venezuelan is 72 cents a day. Therefore we have close to a situation where 96% of the population is poor and 80% is indigent. These sons of thousands want to send us to that shitty model. Bitch.
You don't go to you.
You don't go to you.
You don't go to you.
You don't go to you. In the street of the city, in the station, in our seratas, it seemed the casualties. What is happening in the economy, Argentina?
Well, Argentina is going through the worst economic and social crisis in its history. To give you an idea, this is worse than the 2002 crisis. In 2002, the GDP in Argentina fell 10.9% with a fall of 16% in the second quarter of the year. Today you have estimates that the GDP will be falling at least 12.2%, and in the second quarter the drop in the economy was 19.1%. Also, if you take for example what has to do with the levels of unemployment in the fall of 2002, then you had 25% unemployment. Today the statistics show you unemployment at 13.1%, however, when you correct for the salient effect, yes? What would the salient effect be like? Because it's worth explaining. Suppose a waiter lost his job because the bar closed. Well, he's going to go find another bar, if the other bar closed as well. It's not that he doesn't want to work. Actually he's not going to look for him because he knows he won't find it. When you correct for this effect, the true unemployment rate in Argentina is 29%. On the other hand, what you have is that, during the 2002 crisis, the number of poor people reached 55%. Today in the first semester the number of poor people is 41%, but if you take the second quarter it is 47%, and let's say that today, but there is also another bigger problem, that is the problem of whether hyperinflation is unleashed, because in reality what you have is that if an event of these characteristics were to break out, the number of poor could reach 75%. Therefore, we would have the worst economic and social crisis in history, with, let's say, an open ending, because I believe that this level of poverty could not even be managed by Peronism. It is true that the whole world is showing falls, but Argentina is among the worst. Think that the drop in GDP in the world will be around 3.5%.
And in Argentina?
At least 12% will fall, which is what the government expects. Therefore, we did something wrong.
What is happening with the weight, Javier? That people can buy less and less is enough, they reach the end of the month. I mean, what about the weight?
Well, actually what you are seeing is that it is not that prices go up or that the dollar goes up. In reality, what is happening is that it loses the purchasing power of the peso. As Friedman said, inflation is always a monetary phenomenon everywhere. As you issue more money than people want to retain, the purchasing power of money will fall. And why does that happen? It happens because when you have an excess supply of money, either because there is an explosion of money creation, For example, the Argentine case to finance the fiscal deficit, on the other hand a flight of money, which I'd also endorse and I think correct on the part of the people who despise the peso, because you have to remember that the peso is the currency issued by the Argentine politician. Therefore it cannot be worth excrement, because that garbage is not even good for a bonus in the face of an explosion of excess supply of money. Either because you are issuing a lot, because demand falls and you also have a monstrous drop in the level of activity, the peso is going to lose value, and that makes all prices expressed in monetary units rise. It is more the dollar as it is if the price of a financial asset rises first, followed by the price of tradables, then wholesalers, then retailers, and finally wages. That is also why when you have an explosion in the exchange rate, the number of poor and indigenous people rises very sharply as a consequence of the fact that the price of food is determined in dollars. From last year's past to this moment, the exchange rate rose more than 300%, therefore this economy brings an inflationary inertia of 300%. If I take, for example, the latest inflation data of 2.8 and I contemplate that there is 70% of the price index, whether it is stepped on or in quarantine, it means a monthly inflation of 10 annualized gives you 200. That is, put it as you want, but they do not give you the numbers in addition. In other words, you have 8 points of primary fiscal deficit. That is, you are issuing like crazy. God. People are rejecting the peso. That is why you have the stocks that you have. So let's say, and with a monstrous drop in the level of activity, therefore, prices will inexorably drop. They are going to go to the cloud, because there is also another problem called money over. What happens there? Well, look, let's say people can't get rid of pesos so easily either. So, for example, what you see is that the speed of money is falling a lot.
Wait for the economy to open. Do you know how the speed of money is going to be restored to normal levels?
And when all prices start to rise and the exchange rate goes to the ass of the world, what do you think? That people are going to fall in pesos. Forget.
Boom.
And the trap? How can we define it as a measure?
Look, the stocks in rigor is an immoral measure and also constitutes a scam. It is immoral because it implies a curtailment of individual liberties, because someone from the armchair was told the threat of saying that you cannot consume a certain product. For example, they could also say, well, from tomorrow, no more tomatoes are consumed, and you know how they are going. The tomato growers will be there. They will be like crazy.
Well, what he is telling you here is that you cannot buy more dollars.
The reality is that if you earned your money honestly, let's say, what do you have to explain? What do you buy or what do you not buy? I mean, listen to me, if I earn my money honestly, I don't have to explain to anyone what I do with my money. First point. But the dollar has an additional element that is complicated, which is the store of value that the Argentine chose. Faced with the scam that is the peso, the reserve of value is the dollar, that is, it is your future consumption. So when they don't let you buy dollars, what they are doing to you is also, not only that they are conditioning a part of your present consumption, but also that they are destroying your future consumption. They are also immoral because they tell you to save in pesos when they save in dollars. Or, for example, the other day a journalist asked Guzman about his savings in dollars and he said, "Oh no, well, but that's my personal decision." Or Mrs. Cecilia Tedesca, who says that you have to fall in love with the stocks, but she, let's say, also saves in dollars. So, the truth is that what one sees is a great hypocrisy. In other words, and they are liars, they are directly liars. But why do they do this? Well, they do this because when they force you to demand pesos, they increase the tax base of the inflationary tax. So what is the point? That in reality, the inflationary tax is a robbery because it is a non-legislated tax. For this reason, one of the things that people should take into account, that those who, for example, call me crazy for wanting to eliminate the central bank, should know that the central bank today steals 5 points of GDP with an inflation tax. That is to say, politics robs us of good things from Argentines. 5 points of GDP also hits 25 times harder on the most vulnerable. Therefore, I mean, all the progressives and who love the central bank and ripping people off with the inflation tax, especially those idiots who talk about it being crazy to close the central bank, are defending the theft of politics, because the inflationary tax is a non-legislated tax.
The country tax, the solidarity tax, the possible wealth tax.
The government wants to raise taxes.
Is it time, in the middle of a pandemic, a quarantine, to raise taxes?
The point of change, that is, it is never the time to raise taxes. In other words, the only idiots who raise taxes besides the Argentines are the Spanish, that is, the European branch of Chavismo. They talk about solidarity, but they did not touch theirs, that is, theirs was not touched. He said no, that is an act of demagogy. What act of demagogy? You left everyone income and you didn't touch yours. Not only that, you have another problem that they say is temporary. It is a lie. When the income tax began, which was the income tax, back in the 30s, it was transitory and remained. When they said they were going to raise VAT to 21%, which was transitory, it stayed. When they put gross income, they said it was going to be transitory and it stayed. When they put the tax on the check, they said it was transitory and it stayed. When they put the withholdings, they said it was transitory and they stayed. So it's a lie that they're going to make it transitory. A tax increase is never transitory because once the waste passes and the collection is recomposed, the politicians do not return it to you, they keep it and use it to spend themselves, because they consider that it is better to spend it than for the one who spends it, generates it, the one who wins it. In other words, that is what ends up making this country absolutely unviable, because it has 170 taxes, it has the highest blank tax burden in the world, it is the most anti-business country, not only because of the tax burden but also because of the number of regulations that reach 69,000. It is impossible to earn money. That's why let's say the companies are leaving here. They are leaving because when they also see the behavior of the government in perfect line with the guidelines of the San Pablo Forum, and this story is already known from Venezuela, for therefore, the employees are fleeing in terror. So let's say we are facing a situation that is crazy and that this cannot end well. It will not end well, it will end badly. Let's say, I am deeply upset when some asshole spokesman for the president appear and say, oh well, but in all the wealth that 1% has, you have to be generous, always generous with the Gina. Why not? Because let's say depending on how much they are going to
They didn't download anything.
No, well, but also, for example, there is a VIT study that shows that, for example, the technical inefficiency of public spending in the world, which region has the greatest inefficiency? Latin America with 4.4% of GDP. How much does Argentina have? 7.2%? 7.2%? See if they have to go down. And you know what? That within those 7.2%, there are 5 points of the Koryo GDP. So they can't stop stealing and they keep breaking the tax imposed on us. But why don't they shit? Do you understand what I'm telling you? I mean, they have me rotten. They make a face at you and say no way. In reality you have to make an effort and they never make the effort. Do you understand me? And they also use arguments that are false because they have that wealth that the individual has somewhere, as they have it. They have it in a savings format, and that savings is what allows financing the investment, and that investment generates new jobs and generate growth, and when you seize and destroy that to give it to the public sector so that it squanders it, that is, we are going to have less wealth. Let's say we are going to have less available savings to finance investment. Therefore we are going to be poorer, and also what other than you are going to know that the incentives are for the ass, because let's say what incentives do you have to accumulate wealth if he is going to come to the government when his ass sings and he steals it from you?
Libertarians. We are facing a historic moment. After 100 years of socialist decline, of being victimized by impoverishing lefties, individuals began to wake up. It is our mission to tell you that the path is the path of freedom. Let's remember that those countries that are free, the GDP per capita is 8 times bigger than the repressed countries. In addition, the lowest deci of the distribution is 11 times better than its equivalent in the repressed country and is also better than 90% of the population. We have 25 times fewer standard poor and 50 times fewer extreme poor.
Remember that we are superior in terms of morality, since socialism is based on envy, hatred, resentment, unequal treatment before the law, robbery and murder, while we are based on unrestricted respect for the life project of the neighbor, where it is only possible to be successful, serving the neighbor with better quality goods at a better price.
And as if all this were not enough, we are aesthetically superior. Remember what the Soviet Union was like, while we're its square, dark, windowless buildings, or the rubbish from Cuba, which looks like a Unis or Piezo. Compare with every wonder that is New York.
Therefore, victory will be ours. Let's move forward without fear.
Long live the left, horses.
Live.
Miguel.
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 Flirt.
Flirt. Flirt.
The central bank is doing its thing again. I think it's time to close it. One good time.
Destruction.
Empresarios, a la mierda, sodomitas del capital. Basta de basura keynesiana, ha llegado el momento liberal. Tenemos un líder y él es un gran referente que al Estado siempre logra incomodar. Javier Milei, futuro presidente. Javier Milei, el último punk, siempre en contra de la presión tributaria, siempre en contra del estatismo abusador, combatiendo por una Argentina libertaria y por la libertad del pueblo trabajador. Hace más de un siglo nos gobiernan los buenistas, los que roban para de lacras mantener. Esos que pagan a dudosos funcionarios, que el dinero de la gente quieren retener. Que estamos bien, comparados con qué. 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 Si seguimos así, arruinaremos nuestra vida y vamos a envidiar el bienestar de Somalia. Javier Milei, el último punk, nuestro superhéroe de la libertad. Javier Milei, oh, oh, Javier Milei, oh, oh, Javier Milei, el último punk. Javier Milei, el último punk. Javier Milei, el último punk. Javier Milei, el último, nuestro superhéroe.